So what is your name and where are you from?
My name is Ana Gomez-Garcia. I am from Argentina. Came to the United States when I was 7 years old, and my family and I settled in Santa Monica. Yes, I am an attorney, and I specialize in workers' compensation and personal injury.
Okay. And you own your own firm?
I do own my own firm.
This is it behind you, Gomez-Garcia Law Firm?
Yes, Gomez-Garcia Law, Inc.
Law Inc.
Yes.
Okay, and is that's your name?
That is my last name. My last name is Gomez-Garcia.
Of growing up in Argentina?
Yes, and I have memories of growing up in Argentina, and for years my family would go back in the summertime and I would spend months at a time there. Mm-hmm. So definitely have a lot of memories from there.
What was that experience like, just kind of, learning, what were the differences in culture, I guess?
The differences in culture are pretty extreme. I would say South America, Argentina, very laid back atmosphere. I have a lot of cousins there, a lot of family, so it always felt like a big reunion to come home. And in the United States, it was just myself, my younger brother, and my mother and father. So it was a much smaller community out here.
Got it, makes sense. And then what was your experience growing up in Santa Monica? What was that like?
Santa Monica has changed a lot since I grew up. When I was young, it was still this small hippie beach town. Felt like a different place outside of Los Angeles. It was actually very nice to grow up. Now it's a little bit more populated and congested, so that's changed a lot about it. But as a kid, it was great.
Mm-hmm. So what was it like? You said you had 2 siblings, or?
I have one younger brother.
Oh, yeah, one younger brother.
Martin.
Okay.
Yes, one younger brother.
Are you guys close still?
We're close, yeah. He still lives in Santa Monica, and we see each other every weekend. So yeah, very close.
Nice. Do you speak Spanish?
I do. I am fluent in Spanish.
Okay. So I'm guessing you had to go through a lot of schooling to become an attorney. What was that process like, and what motivated you to go through that?
There is a lot of schooling to become an attorney, and it is a long process. What motivated me was I knew I always wanted to be a lawyer. I knew how many years I would have to put in, so mentally I was pretty prepared for how long it was going to take. But yeah.
Okay. So you graduated high school, and then you immediately knew that you wanted to study law.
Yes, I graduated high school, and when I went into college, I thought I wanted to do entertainment law. So what I did was I enrolled in the business school and thought that was the best way to go about it. But then realized that regardless, the process to get into law school was going to be the same regardless of what your bachelor's degree was in. So when I finished college, while I was in college, I began the process of preparing for the LSAT and applying to law schools.
Cool. And then where did you apply to? Where did you go?
So I've been with the Loyola Marymount family basically my whole life. I went to Marymount High School, which was an all-girls Catholic school. I then went to Loyola Marymount University, and then I went to Loyola Law. Yes.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of controversy right now over the benefits of staying in school. What advice do you have to people who maybe don't know if they should continue their education?
If your plan is to go into higher education, you want to get your master's, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor, you have to complete college. It's a prerequisite. So if that is your journey, that is your path, then it's mandatory. But if you're looking at just completing college and going straight into the workforce, I think that a lot has changed in terms of whether it's necessary or not, whether vocational training, a trade school is a better option, better prepares you to earn a healthier income. So I agree that college is not producing the same results as it was before in terms of guaranteeing people job security.
For you personally, how was your college experience?
I don't remember much of college. It feels very blurry only because I was doing a lot in college. I was working, I was going to classes, I was involved in a lot of extracurriculars. And in the back of my mind, I was just always preparing for law school. So my mind was not fully present when I was in college, but it was great because it was my first time living alone, building relationships, learning how to network, just learning basic life skills that you don't get as a teenager living at home. So for those reasons, it was great. And overall, it was a very good experience because LMU is a great school.
What were the differences from getting your bachelor's to going to law school? Like, was it more difficult? What's kind of the differences there?
That's a good question. Comparing undergraduate school to law school is night and day. In college, you had the time to engage in extracurricular activities, join clubs, join organizations. I could work. I worked 25 to 30 hours a week and still completed my classes and still did well in school. Law school was a different beast. It was 100% studying. You weren't allowed to really have a life outside of law school. So it was just school, you went home, you studied for the next day, back to school. Weekends were spent studying. It was a lot more intense with the reading, with the memorization, with the comprehension. You had no time to do anything else. So you were really on lockdown for 3 years trying to finish and prepare for the bar exam.
How do you recommend finding like a specialization?
In law?
Yeah.
Finding a specialization in law comes once you're in the workforce. A lot of people go into law school thinking they know what kind of law they want to practice, but when they get out and they actually practice that kind of law, they figure out that that's not what they want to do. I went into law school thinking I wanted to do entertainment, business law. And I interned at a few places. I met attorneys in those industries, and I realized quickly that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in a courtroom. I wanted to be in front of a jury, in front of judges, and that has nothing really to do with entertainment law. So once I was out of law school and working is when I realized that wasn't really a good fit for me. Most people realize it once they're out of law school.
Do you remember your first time actually working a case inside the courtroom? What was that experience like?
Yes, so I think everyone's first time in front of a judge in a courtroom is pretty scary, pretty nerve-wracking. Luckily, the firm that I went to following out of law school allowed me to shadow attorneys before sending me out on my own. So I would just kind of observe and watch and see what more experienced attorneys would do in certain situations. And then when it was finally my turn, I was still very nervous, very intimidated. But it eased up the more I went to court, the more familiar I became with the process. Every time it got a little bit easier.
So when it comes to getting through law school and passing the bar, is that a difficult process, or was it for you?
Very difficult. It's very difficult because the bar exam is a tough exam, and law school is supposed to prepare you for the test, but in reality, once you graduate, you have a very limited amount of time to actually study because you graduate in May, the test is in, I would say end of May, the test is in July. You have 2 months of intense studying to prepare for it, and in California, the passage rate is still fairly low, so it's tough.
Okay, and what happens if you fail the exam? You can take it again later?
You can take the exam as many times as necessary, but it is pricey, and studying and having to take time off from work to focus on studying is also not cheap. So it's definitely you want to try to pass the first time. Obviously that doesn't happen for a lot of people, but it's just challenging if you have to keep taking it over and over again.
What do you think is the most valuable characteristic for a person to have that wants to become an attorney, pass the bar exam?
Characteristics that are important for someone to become a good attorney, I would say, is someone that's resilient, has a lot of tenacity, a lot of grit, and is competitive, has a competitive nature about them.
Definitely. So you pass the bar exam, then you're an attorney? How does that work?
Basically, you pass the bar exam and then you go through a moral examination, basically a very intense background check. And if you pass that along with the bar exam, then you are ready to become licensed.
Okay. And then how do you go through the process of becoming licensed?
So once you pass the bar exam, once you pass the moral examination, which is basically a very intense background check, you submit paperwork showing that you passed both steps, and then you have to get sworn in by a judge. So a judge swears you in, and then once you're sworn in, you are able to practice.
Okay, and so at that point, you look for like a firm to hire you on, or what are the next steps from there typically?
Typically, yes. So you either, maybe you were interning somewhere before while you were waiting for your results, or maybe you were working as a clerk or as a lower level staff member of a firm, and hopefully they will hire you once you pass the bar, or you just start applying. You start applying onto job sites and sending in your resume to openings that you see that you're interested in.
For sure. So what was that process like for you? Were you already interning somewhere? Where did you first begin practicing?
I believe for me, because I didn't take any breaks, so I went straight from law school to the bar to getting my license. There wasn't time to work in that period. My first job coming out of law school was working in civil defense. I worked representing insurance companies against personal injury claims, and that job really prepared me for what I do now, in the sense that I got to look at the other side of how a defendant would fight, and I got a lot of courtroom experience. I worked under very seasoned attorneys and learned a lot in the process, so it was a great first job to have out of law school.
Okay. Where did you go from there?
So after my job at Civil Defense, I was recruited by Travelers, a workers' compensation company. It was my first job in workers' compensation, also doing defense work. And in that job, I solely defended insurance companies against work injury claims. So I have experience in both, in the defense world, in civil and in workers' compensation.
When did you transition into workers' compensation?
I transitioned into workers' compensation a couple years after my civil defense job. So I had a couple years under my belt, and then I went into workers' compensation for 4 years of doing workers' compensation defense.
Okay. And was that something you were motivated to do based on the knowledge you had gained before, or what was the motivation there?
The motivation at that time was money,
Yeah.
because Travelers was paying significantly more than I was making doing civil defense.
Yeah.
So it was a no-brainer for me. And I knew nothing about workers' compensation when I went into it, so I really had to learn from scratch. But in the end, it ended up being a great area of law to know and practice in, because majority of my firm now is workers' compensation representing injured workers.
Okay. So how did you make that transition into wanting to start your own firm? Was that like a long process? Was it, when did you start even considering that?
I always knew I wanted to work for myself. Both my parents own their own businesses. I think it was instilled at a very young age the importance of working for yourself. So that was always the plan. For me, I never saw myself representing insurance companies. I'm Latina. I come from a Spanish-speaking home. I speak Spanish. I felt I could be much more used to the Spanish community, to injured people, to injured workers. I thought my talent would be better served there, and that's how I made the decision to switch sides into representing the injured workers and people.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about transitioning into working just for yourself? What was that process like? Was that scary to jump into that, or tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, deciding to work for myself was very scary, because it's a big leap of faith, and you go from having a very secure, comfortable salary to being at zero, and just having to trust the process and trust that in time your business will grow. But it's also very rewarding. There's a lot that you learn in operating your own business that you would never learn working for somebody else. How to manage a staff, how to market, how to balance the finances of a firm, how to balance just in general everyday life with, the hours involved in running a business. So overall, it teaches you so much more when you work for yourself. But it is very challenging, especially in the beginning.
So you've opened an office here in Claremont. How long have you been here?
We moved to Claremont in April of last year. So we've been here a little over a year.
Okay, and previously you had an office in Los Angeles?
Previously we were in Los Angeles, correct.
Okay. What made you want to open an office out in Claremont?
What made me want to move to Claremont was primarily my office administrator, my manager, Sam. He is from this area. When I met him, he was commuting to my office in Los Angeles when I hired him on to run my office. And in time, he convinced me that this area would be a great area to expand, that there was a lot of need for attorneys out here, and there wasn't many with established practices. So I came out here, I spent a few weekends here, just kind of getting to know the area, and I really fell in love with it, especially the Claremont Village. That's just beautiful. It was just going to be a better environment for my staff as well. So we made the decision to move the whole practice here.
Okay, awesome. Congrats on the move.
Thank you.
I think it'll be good for you. Okay, and can you go into a little bit more detail about the service that you provide?
Yes, so we provide legal services in the areas of workers' compensation, so people that are injured at work, and also personal injury, which basically encompasses people injured as a result of the negligence of someone else. So it can be car accidents, slip and falls, dog bites, any type of injury that's caused by another individual or entity falls under the realm of personal injury, and we do both here.
Okay, so what's the difference between personal injury and workers' comp?
That's a good question. So the difference between personal injury and workers' compensation. Personal injury, for you to have a case, someone has to be at fault for your injury, whether it's because of an intentional harm or a negligent harm, meaning that someone was careless and you were injured as a result, or an entity was careless and you were injured as a result. Workers' compensation involves injuries at work. It's known as a no-fault system, so it doesn't matter who was at fault for your injury. If you were working somewhere and you were hurt as a result, then you have a workers' compensation claim.
You mentioned car accidents. Are those a common type of personal injury?
Yes, car accidents are probably the most common type of personal injury, mainly because there's millions of cars on the road every day, and as a result, car accidents tend to be more frequent than, let's say, a slip and fall or a premise accident. They're very common in Southern California specifically.
Okay, so let's say someone gets into a car accident, they're rear-ended on the highway, or what should be their course of action?
The first thing someone should do if they're in an accident, whether it's a rear end, whether it's a T-bone, side swipe, is they should call the police and get a police report. People are surprised that the person that hits them somehow changes their story 2-3 days later to the insurance company, and there's no evidence, there's no witnesses to contradict that, and you can lose out on your claim that way. So it's very important to document the accident right at that time, call the police, make a police report, take photographs, and do the best you can to preserve evidence right at that moment.
That's really good to know. I think most people probably don't know that, especially being so flustered in the moment. Okay, so same question, but for personal injury, what should be the first course of action
for workers' compensation?
For workers' compensation.
The first action you should take in a workers' compensation claim is similar. You need to report the injury, document the injury. If you get hurt on the job and your supervisor is not there, or there's no one to report it to, make a note to yourself, report it the next day. The earlier you report the injury, the better chance you have of it being accepted by the insurance company.
Report it right away.
Report it right away. Document it right away.
And you would say that personal injuries are more common?
Well, no, in California, we have so many workers. I think they're both equally common. And also workers' compensation covers injuries that personal injury doesn't. For example, workers' compensation covers repetitive injuries. So maybe you've worked at a job for a long time and over time you develop pain, wear and tear on the body. That's probably the most common workers' compensation injury we see. And then in workers' compensation, it allows things like psych claims where if a job is causing you mental harm, you have the ability to file a psychological injury, which is really not the case on the personal injury side. So it's more all-encompassing when it comes to injuries. So I would say they're both very common for different reasons.
Okay. If you weren't specializing in this type of law now, what do you think you would be doing?
If I wasn't specializing in this type of law, I don't think I would be doing law, period. There's no real other area that interests me. I like real estate. I like the real estate business, but not the legal side of real estate. So more on a personal level, that's probably what I would want to do.
This one's a little bit different. If you could name like top 5 lawyer movies or shows, what would they be?
Movies, top 5 law movies are more the old school ones, like My Cousin Vinny. A Civil Action is a classic for personal injury attorneys. TV shows, I was a big fan of Goliath when it was on, and Lincoln Lawyer was actually surprisingly pretty realistic, the TV show. I would say those are probably my top ones to pick from.
What advice would you give to yourself if you could go and give yourself advice your first year as an attorney? What would it be?
If I could go give myself advice as a first-year attorney, it would probably be to have patience with myself, that the confidence will come with experience, to not be in such a rush to want to know everything, and that a lot of my learning will come from mistakes. So mistakes are actually what are going to help me mold me into the better attorney.
How long have you been practicing?
I became licensed in 2011, so I guess that's 15 years of practicing.
Do you have any advice for someone who is thinking about becoming a lawyer? Is there anything that you think they should know before making the decision?
If you're thinking about becoming a lawyer, I think it would be great to start working at a law firm. Law firms have all kinds of job positions, very entry level where you're kind of working in the mailroom, to more experienced paralegal case manager work, and I think it would give you a great eye into what your everyday would be like as an attorney. And getting that experience early on can really either make you make up your mind in terms of, is this what I really want to do or not?
So what would you say sets you and your team apart from other firms?
I think what sets us apart here from other firms is that we, one, come from a defense background. So I think we know a lot of the strategies that are used by the defendant, the insurance companies mainly, when they're fighting claims, and it gives us an advantage and really puts us in front of the problem most of the time with our cases. We also are all Spanish-speaking staff, so we really can help the Spanish community in all aspects of their case and understanding the process. And we've had some great results. We post them, pretty often when they come up, but we've gotten some really great results for our clients, both in workers' comp and personal injury.
Do you find it rewarding doing what you do?
I find this very rewarding. I feel like we're doing our part in helping the community. I feel like we're helping people get the compensation that they deserve when they're hurt, and that includes both in personal injury and in their work injuries as well.